Hello again. So in the last video I showed you all the parts, and in this video what we're going to do is we're going to solder the board together. And the tools that you're going to need I've got laid out here. So I've just got some basic tools. I've got a scalpel, a pair of tweezers and some snips. They are nothing special. I've got some solder for the soldering iron. The soldering iron that I have looks special, but it's really not. It just basically got on off, and it's got 3 temperature settings. I have it set to 350 degrees Celsius. I've got a little sponge for cleaning the tip, and that's one of the things that I want to note as well. It's very important to keep the tip nice and shiny. I've also got a multimeter, and we're going to use that to test the voltage here on these pins, which I mentioned before. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by soldering this guy here, and there's a couple of things we need to do to modify that. Nothing too crazy, but I'm going to put you on a tripod now so that the camera's steady and I've got my hands free, and then I'll show you what we're going to do. Okay, so here's the board, and there's a couple of things we're going to have to do. So we're going to have to remove this pin header here because that's not needed, and I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% certain, but we will find out together, that this capacitor and this plug here are not needed at all in our use, because that is a 12 volt input, and I think this capacitor does the voltage regulation, which we are going to be using the other board for anyway, so we're not going to need them parts, and they are actually too tall as well to fit in the case of the Evergrow or Photon, whatever you want to call it, the light in the case. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to put this pin header on these pins here. So what I'll do now is I'm not going to talk much. I'm just going to put it into time-lapse mode, and I'm just going to keep you focused in on it, and I'm just going to go through it really quickly. Something I should probably mention before we start: to remove the parts, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be turning it over, and I'm just going to be applying heat to these pins here, and with my other finger here apply a little bit of pressure in this direction here, so it's going to pull that pin out, and then I will rock it and do the other pin, and I'm just going to basically rock it out. I'll do that with both of them, and it's a similar sort of thing here. Just heat the pads up and gently try and rock it out. The trick here is not to force it. If it doesn't want to move, then it won't move. You need to basically put more solder on it and apply more heat. Okay, so now this board is ready, and as you can see, getting that pin on there, I basically put on one solder point on the bottom, and then I kept reheating it and eyeballed it until it looked pretty straight to me, and once it was straight I soldered in all the other ones. To remove this one is a bit more tricky than the other two because you can't really touch it because it gets quite hot, but basically what I did is I put quite a fair bit of solder on, and then just kept running the soldering iron over it in a pattern, and eventually all the pins got heated up and it pretty much just fell out the bottom. So it's just patience, and that's all it needs really, a bit of patience. So that part now can go underneath this board, so that will fit on there. I have noticed with these first PCBs that I've ordered that this hole spacing isn't quite right. So what that means is I've had to ever so slightly bend these pins. They bend towards the center, so these are bent slightly this way and these are bent slightly this way. I don't know if you can see that. It's a lot more pronounced when you put it in the board, but it's nothing to worry about, and I will correct it in future revisions of the board. So basically that just gets popped into the bottom there like that. It's a bit of a fiddle because you've got lots and lots of pins, but that goes in there like that. And basically what we're going to do now is we're going to do the same as we did on this here. We're going to solder in just a couple of pads, and then we're going to heat it and move it until it's sitting exactly how we want it. And once it's seated right, we will solder in all the pads. So that is the next step. Okay, so here's the board soldered on, finished. You may be wondering why I did the cutout here, and that is because I am not sure if I'm going to need the capacitor. I know I'm not going to need that, but I'm not sure if the capacitor is needed or not. I'm going to leave it off for now and see if it works without it, because it would obviously be better. And you can obviously see the pins there are slightly at an angle, as you can see on the version 1.1. That is a problem, but obviously in the future revisions I'm going to modify it so that the pins fit better. But you can see it is possible to get it in there, it's just a bit tricky. The next part I'm going to do is the voltage regulator. So for the power regulator, what I've got is I've got the regulator itself, and I've got the place here where it's going to go, and I've got these pin headers. And if we turn it over, you can see here it's got the input plus and the output plus. They're all labelled and they correspond to the pins on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these pins in here like that, because we need to start by soldering the bottom side of it. I'm going to put them in there like that, and then I'm going to place the power board on the top with the input side on this. This is the input side here. It says in, out, out. I'm just going to pop that on there. This is a bit tricky, a bit fiddly, but because you've got to line up all the pins. Like that. And then what I'm going to do, because we need to turn the board over, I'm going to get a bit of tape and just secure it with a bit of tape. And then from this point on, it'll be a time lapse. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to solder each of these pads, and then I'll turn it back on the top and solder the top on. So that's that all soldered up, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove the tape from the bottom, and that will, as you can see, it's nice and securely in there now. Come on camera, focus up. And we will be testing the voltage with that soon. But what the next job is we're going to have to put in this resistor. The reason for putting in these two parts now is because once the Raspberry Pi is actually on, you're not going to be able to get to the pads underneath here because it covers this whole area. So I brought myself a little resistor pack, and it came with a load of resistors. But the resistor you're going to need is a 4.7 kilo ohm resistor, and it doesn't matter which way you plug it in. So you can plug it in like that or like that, it doesn't matter. And what you're going to do is you're just going to put it through the holes, and you're going to pull it down like that, and then you're just going to solder it in from the bottom. And once that's all soldered, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pair of snips and I'm just going to cut off the excess wire from the resistor, and now that's all nice and soldered up. So the next job is going to be to remove this and take this to one side and bring back in the Raspberry Pi here, and we're going to be soldering on these pin headers onto the Raspberry Pi. Now they go on the top like that, so you're going to put them on the top just like that. It's a bit of a fiddle. And then I like to do the same technique as I did before. I'm just going to put a bit of tape over the top and just hold them on with a bit of tape to start off with, because that enables me to move them about, get them straight. As you can see, they're not straight there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same as I did before with the other board. I'm just going to solder one pad on each corner, and then I can warm that up and use that to manipulate it into the position it needs to be in. Okay, so I finished soldering it. Well, I say I finished, I've not finished. I've purposely left in some mistakes, and if you've got a keen eye, you'll be able to spot them, and I've done them so that I can show you them. We've got a bridge here, look, these two pins are connected. And there's another one here, no? And this solder pin here, if you look, it's got solder on it, and the pad is not actually connected. So what you got to do is you just got to be a bit tedious with it and really go over it with a fine-tooth comb after you've done, and really check to make sure all the pins are all nice and soldered on. If you can, I would advise you to get a pre-soldered one, but I was only able to get one that didn't have the pins soldered on it. But if you have to correct stuff like this, then what I would advise is you get one of these, a solder sucker, and basically you heat it up, and then you can put that on the area and you can remove some of the excess solder. So what I'm going to do is I'll do that now, and then we will move on to putting it on the board. So I finished soldering the back. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it really doesn't need to be perfect. This is, at the end of the day, a DIY project. The only thing you need to do is you need to go over it and just make sure none of the pins are bridging, and that the solder, all the pins are soldered to the pads. So the next job is going to be to put it in the board, and to do that, there's a few things we're going to have to do. So what happens is this board will sit on top of that like that. And as you can see, it fits in there quite nicely, and it's pretty much flush with all the other components. There is a couple of things you need to be careful of. So just here, these pads go through and they are on top of this HDMI port, which is a potential problem. And also this pin here is very close to this USB port. So what you have to do is just eyeball it down there and make sure that they're soldering are not touching. And what we're going to do before we're soldering on, I'm going to get a bit of double-sided tape and put it over this HDMI cable, and that is going to give me my distance between the these two boards. So what I've got here is a piece of this double-sided tape. It's really small, that's why it's on the end of a scalpel at the minute, so that it's easier to film for you guys. But what I want to do is I'm going to place that on top of this port here, and that is going to act as like basically a distance piece to keep the board at the right distance. Take that other side off there, and then to put it in, it will fit on the bottom like that. And we're just going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to solder each one of these corners, just one pin on each corner, and then we're going to just move it about and see how it fits nicely in the board. Okay, so now I'm just going to have a look and just check, and you can see it's at a slight angle there. This side here is slightly closer to the board, so I'm just going to heat that pin and move it down a little bit. But before I do that, I'm just going to turn it over and check to make sure on the inside of here that there's no potential contact, and it's all looking good inside. It's actually, if you look there, look, it's at a little bit of an angle, so I might move the whole board out a little bit on here as well. So I'm just going to go through it and move it and wiggle it about a little bit, and once it's all done, I'm going to go through and solder up all of the pins just as we did before. So there it is, it's all nice and finished, and as you can see, it's not a perfect job, but it really doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be nice and clean, and make sure that there's no bridging between the pins. If you look between the two boards, you can see that there's no contact between the Raspberry Pi and any of the sticking out parts of the pins that we've previously soldered. So the next part is, there's really only two more things we need to do before we have to take apart the light itself, and that is to solder on the temperature sensor, and that is also, we're going to be snipping off these pins here just to gain a little bit of height, because that's the top part of the board, so we need to try and reduce this thickness here. So I'm going to put you in time-lapse mode and I'm going to breeze through that. Just before I do that, these temperature sensors here, they have 3 wires inside. If I was to take this off, and I'll show you the insides quickly, they have 3 wires. So they've got obviously a red and a black, which is power and the ground, and then they've got a signal wire here, and these correspond to the pins on there. So we have the ground, which is the black, 3.3 volts, which is the red, and the yellow, which is the signal. So to solder the wires, we need to do something which is called tinning the wires. It basically makes them stronger and it makes a stronger bond. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my knife and just score it, and as you can see on the previous ones, I'm just going to pull it out just ever so slightly like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that bit of insulation just to twist it until it comes off. And I'm going to do that on all of them like that, and that creates a nice, oh, that one came off too early. That creates just a nice twisted wire at the end. I know it's quite hard for you to see on the camera, but what we're going to do now is I'm just going to use my snips to hold that in place, and then I'm going to get my soldering iron and I'm just going to fill that bit of wire there with solder. The solder will get soaked up into that twisted wire and create a hard piece of the wire. There you can see, look, there's solder twisted around the wire. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just snip that off so that there's just a little piece of the wire sticking out. Come on camera, do your job. Just like that. And that is now ready to solder to the board. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get a bit of hot glue, and I'm just going to help secure these wires down just with a bit of hot glue to keep them safe. And then this is pretty much ready to put to one side, ready for the next video, where I will be removing the plug and putting it on the board itself, and we will be installing it and testing the voltage. Okay, so I thought I'd finish the video with some corals, because that is what this is all about. And I'd like to thank you for watching. In the next video, like I say, I will be taking apart the light and putting on the plug, soldering the plug on, and getting it, having its first power up so that we can test the voltage. After that, following on from that, I'll be more like a computer video where I'll be showing you how to install the software and all of that. If you're wondering what this video is all about, why am I soldering and doing electronics work on a reefing video, what I'm making is a controller for my light so that I can control it using Reefpi. And Reefpi is a piece of software which is open source and anyone can use it, and it works on a Raspberry Pi, and you can use it to control your light basically. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.